us on the case.
Hello, Core955 is back again with a brand new review. This time we're covering Cold Fear. I'd like to also give a shout out to Shadowleggy for another great art piece. Now let's dive into this ship before we start wailing in the corner. Developed by Darkworks, who are also known for their fantastic work on Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, which is another survival horror game that I really enjoyed. Cold Fear is a survival horror game based on a tight, dark, and isolated whaling ship, which is stuck in the middle of a massive storm. It's the perfect situation for a survival horror experience. Alone, in the dark, and no friends to help save you. You are Hansen, and no, not Chris, but these predators do need to sit down. A ship disguised as a whaling ship, but is actually used for the hauling of an ancient parasite, released when an oil platform cracks them open in the search of oil. You're sent in by the CIA to investigate and recover anything that can be found, after the first Special Forces team is wiped out. Trapped in a dark hell, surrounded by scared Russians and a bloodthirsty foe preying on you and them, it's up to you to escape and survive this hell. The game is a solid third-person shooter, and the combat feels pretty fine. It's not like the greatest combat to ever exist, but it's fun and works well. Enemies are somewhat destructible. You can pop their heads off and destroy body parts, and it's a lot of fun. You can blow them up, set them on fire, and even more. Plus, there's physics, so say if you blast an enemy with a shotgun and it doesn't kill them, but there's an environmental hazard like say a giant spinning engine crank, you can blast them into it and it'll chop them up, killing them. It's a lot of fun. There's also certain set-piece parts of the environment, like that engine I mentioned specifically. There's a walkway that can be lowered and raised. There's a spot where when you first raise it, a bunch of enemies start trying to cross and attack you. You can lower the bridge again and drop them into the engine, grinding them up. It's pretty fun and silly. Now, to take care of enemies permanently, you have to destroy their head. If you don't destroy their head, they'll get back up. At least with the parasite enemies. Now, with the humans, you don't have to destroy their heads, but if you don't, a parasite could come and infest them, which means they get back up and start attacking you again. And while parasites can use guns, they're much less frequently with it, and they are usually inaccurate, preferring melee combat and to rush you. Now, the game has 3 camera angles that it likes to use. A fixed camera angle, like old Resident Evil, which they often use to set up shots and spooks. Like one of my favorite examples is down in the holds. There's bodies hanging from the ceiling on butcher's hooks. The room is flooded, and that's the first thing you are greeted by, is you see the corpse hanging down in front of you. It's a nice little shot. There's also a third-person camera that's used for aiming, and a free-floating camera that, in most situations, you can control where it's pointing. Now, the save system can be very odd and specific. By that I mean it's not a auto system and it's not a manual save system. It's basically you have to hit a checkpoint before the game will let you make a save. And if you choose to not save at that checkpoint, you've just missed out until you get to a new checkpoint. Which is very annoying, especially if you die and go all the way back. There is also no map, which does make navigating the ship very awkward and annoying at times. It can feel like a claustrophobic maze, running back in circles over and over again until you stumble across the thing that you need. Now, if you're grabbed by an enemy, you'll initiate a quick time event where you have to mash circle to throw them off you. But if you mash it quick enough, you get the chance to fire a critical shot, dealing massive damage or in many cases outright killing them, which is also a nice little touch. Overall, the gameplay is pretty solid and entertaining. I like it. Let's move on. Honestly, the controls are pretty good. They're intuitive, they're easy to use. The only downside is they can be a little stiff at times, and the game doesn't outright tell you about all of them. Like, say, if you start sliding due to the ship's getting hit by waves and starting to tilt, if you push back on the controller, Hansen will steady himself so you don't go sliding off into the ocean. And this game makes use of a stamina system. The stamina system, if it runs out and you go over the ledge, you're gone. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, you are gone. You also have to properly manage your stamina. Because of the game's storm system, you never know when it's going to start acting up and throw you off. And if you don't have enough stamina to hold on until it steadies out, bye-bye. Starting off as Russian mercenaries and slowly escalating to higher exo-mutants, we're starting off with the Exocell, a small, parasitic creature that seeks to force its way down your mouth and do ungodly things with your body. Then we've got the Exo Shade, a leaping creature that just charges along the walls and hides in the dark. Oftentimes it'll hit you and then flee off into the distance using hit-and-run tactics. You've got the Exo Nest, which is created when an exocell seeks a dark hiding place to become a breeding ground for new exocells. You've got the Exo Mass, a big charging behemoth with one big arm and one little arm that serves as a weak point that will run up and try to crush you. You've got the Exo Spectre, a creature capable of blending in with the dark, basically becoming invisible, save for a faint shimmer. You have to either look for the shimmer or listen for footsteps and splashes of puddles. Then there's the final boss. The final boss is a bit of a letdown. I'm not going to go into him lore-wise, but he is very rushed. There's a lot of issues with him because the last half of the game got put under crunch. The company needed to get the game out quick due to financial concerns. So a lot of the last portions of the game are really subpar compared to the early half, which is really strong. This is why the final boss really suffered for it. Though he is kind of cool visually. The atmosphere is awesome, really dark and oppressive, with great sounds to go with it. You can hear the ship just creaking and moaning. You can hear Russians freaking out, screaming, and panicking. You can hear the crackle of electricity from broken circuit panels, electrifying any puddle or source of water nearby. You can hear raging fire or the sound of a sprinkler fighting to put it out. You can hear the mutants just creeping around the ship and trying to kill you. Toss in a really good storm system. Like, the storm system is their pride and joy for this game. They attempted to make the most realistic storm they could. That rages and falls, ebbs and flows. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of peace and calm. Others, you'll just be thrown into the chaos as the wind tries to throw you off, or as the ship is literally rocked by the waves, forcing you to slide. And if there's no wall to catch you, you might just go overboard or hang for your dear life, hoping it subsides before you lose your stamina and fall into the drink. The game's atmosphere is honestly really good. The soundtrack is ambient, creaky, and creepy, with blaring alarms and haunting tracks. Honestly, some of the enemy noises are just so fucking creepy, complementing that audio tracks that go with it, plus all the other sound cues in the environment that make up the atmosphere, as I mentioned, along with the sounds of the storm just raging. It's honestly pretty nice. I enjoyed the soundtrack and the sound effects in the game. The weapons sound decent, and overall it's an enjoyable experience. It's a pretty game, although performance can dip at times with a lot of action. Especially when you go outside with the ship, there's a lot of times it'll slow down with the weather mechanics when it really peaks. You'll get the whole ship rocking, you'll get the storms, you'll get the thunder, you'll have everything being thrown around, enemies, you, plus not to mention the fact that you could be thrown overboard. But there's also a lot of neat little visual effects, like the fact that bodies, corpses that don't fade away, roll around on the ground. Like with the waves of the ship as it rocks and back and forth, the corpses and such will move with it. And if you step in pools of blood, it'll leave bloody footprints that slowly fade away. way. So it's kind of a cool little visual touch. Overall, I really do think it's a pretty game, but the performance can be hit or miss, depending on if you're inside or outside, and depending on how intense the storm is at the moment. So one of the biggest issues with Cold Fear is definitely the lackluster boss. He really feels rushed, and the whole third of the end of the game really feels rushed as a whole. The areas feel kind of samey, and they just feel like they're just there to finish up the whole thing. They're not very well done. This is due to the fact the game was under budget constraints and they had to just get the game out, which is understandable, but overall, it was still a pretty good game, and the first two-thirds of the game are really good, really fun, and really well made. So, honestly, I enjoyed it. Honestly, Cold Fear is a fun experience that sadly fizzles out towards the end. It has a lot of high points, the monsters are creative and interesting, and the story is pretty cool. I really do like the story. And they built a lot of impressive mechanics for the game. Like the way the ship reacts to the impending storm, I really love it. I like how the whole ship rocks and rolls, the waves crash against it, sending sea foam spraying. I like the fact that if you aren't careful, you could be thrown overboard. If you don't pay the storm the respect it deserves, it will throw your ass into the sea. And I like that. It's an interesting mechanic. And overall, the game is relatively cheap and easily obtained. Especially if you go for Steam, oftentimes you can get it for $5–10 bucks, especially when a Steam sale is running. I personally went with the PS2 edition, but overall, I'd give this game a recommendation, but keep in mind the fact that the last half of the game isn't as good as the first half. The first half is really solid, while the second half is kind of just mediocre and meh. But it is still a cool experience nonetheless. I'd like to give one last shout out to Shadowleggy. She did a great art piece on this video. Make sure to check her out down below. And I'd like to remind you to check out our social media down below. This has been Core, and I'll see you next time.